Okay, good. And we do have some additional panelists here, so I think we'll just start closest to me, and I'll have the panelists go down and just talk a little bit more about themselves, say a couple of words of introduction and so forth. So first up.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Craig Waltzer with GovCom, based out of Fort Lauderdale. We've primarily been in the intelligent transportation system space. We've made a transition into smart city, and listened to the presentations this morning, and there's some excellent points about interoperability and communications, and look forward to receiving your questions.
I'm Raynor Smith with Building Clarity. We met earlier this morning. Good to see you again.
Beinfield Worldwide Technology.
Anthony Veri, Integrated Network Concepts.
Good morning, James Caton with SAS. We're a $4 billion company out of Raleigh, North Carolina, that focuses on artificial intelligence in smart cities and in IoT.
Matt Willenbrink, EVP of Sales and Marketing for Fybr. We're an industrial IoT smart city solution provider.
Hey, good morning. I'm Pete Murray. I'm the CEO of Dense Networks. We produce the Connected Cities Tour. We go around the country and we meet with city leaders, and we put on small events, 60 to 80 people, where usually the CTO of the city is a keynote, and we discuss the issues about building smart city platforms, connected cities.
Thanks, guys. So this is one of the bigger panel discussions I've hosted in a while. I apologize if it's a little cramped up there, but it's great to have all you guys here on one panel. I think we have a huge base of knowledge here. Do we have any questions from the audience that we want to start with? I like to defer to the audience first.
Hello, gentlemen. I'm Jim Frazier. I'm the Vice President of Smart Cities here at ARC. Since you come from such a diverse set of backgrounds into the smart city space, I would really just like to ask, to start, a very open-ended question. What are the biggest challenges in implementing a smart city platform, from the original concept of operations phase to the actual deployment and operations and maintenance?
All right, I'll start out with this one, since we've been doing this for just over 20 years. So we've seen all sorts of challenges. I think some of the biggest ones were early on was just matching technology with the urban infrastructure. So figuring out how to get devices to work in the real world and last and function the way that they're intended to, or that they function in a lab or in an indoor environment, was a huge challenge. Once we did that, I think the other challenges are getting buy-in from municipalities and cities, getting people to understand what the technology is, what it can do, how it can benefit municipalities. That's just been an education process that's taken the better part of a decade to do. I think we're just now in the last 2-3 years beginning to see cities other than the large cities start to understand the value of smart city solutions and what they can bring to their communities.
Yeah, I'll offer that. The biggest challenge I've seen in cities is knowing where to start. There are so many departments, so much technology that's easily accessible and easily buildable, that there's projects everywhere with a lack of strategy and a lack of focus. So creating a formal smart city initiative where you decide what your priorities are from a business perspective and not a technology perspective, to me is what I've seen the biggest challenge. I've seen a lot of cities approach smart cities as a technology project, as a technology purchase, and then I'm there the day that they turn it on, and the flat panel comes up and the map comes up and all the lights come on, and you look at the customer and there's this realization in their eyes of, crap, I've got it, I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, now what
am I going to do with all this data?
Yeah, I want to just tag on to that one, because the largest smart city project we were part of was in Kansas City, and very ambitious project. that no one really thought too much about was once it was deployed, who's actually responsible for fixing what? It's new technologies riding on street poles. You've got you've got contractors, you've got technology providers, and I just say it was clear that the city had not really thought through that workflow of support. So something we were able to help them with, but it's an afterthought. It seems like it's sometimes maybe like let's get this shiny object. We've got a certain amount of time to get it done. We've got an electoral cycle. And once they turn it on, it's like, well, that's not my problem anymore, and it really is a problem. So it can leave, if you rely on these different departments within the city to help you, because you really need a different level of integration to make those things work from a process perspective. You don't want to burn your bridges early because you're going to have a hard time getting it done at a later date.
I think one more thing to add really fast to both those comments is that the technology is in a wheelhouse that many of the people tasked with selecting the technologies in the city don't understand, and not to their detriment. It's just not it's not something that they've had experience dealing with or knowledge with in their professional careers. So this is a whole new universe of finding the right people. Either bringing new people in that understand the technology or re-educating people within the municipalities so they do understand the technology and can make informed decisions is a challenge that many cities face as well.
And just to add one last thing on top of what Matt said, I'm part of the IEEE IoT and Smart City Standards Working Group Committee, and right now there really aren't many standards when it comes to IoT and smart cities. So there's a lot of competing technologies and protocols out there. And just if we look at the low power wide area networks, you got LoRa, everybody's familiar generally with LoRaWAN. You got YSUN, you got Sigfox, you got Weightless, you got 6 low WPAN, and there's WirePass, and that's just to name some of the major ones. So when cities get presented this technology, they don't even know what's the leading protocol, let alone understanding what that protocol is or what the difference in different radio frequencies, what problems frequencies have compared to other ones, what are the benefits. So there's a lot that has to be talked about in cities before they really pull the trigger and decide which one that they'll go with. Another thing is there's so many options when it comes to smart technology and IoT solutions out there. You don't want to create the same problem that you're trying to get away from, and that's having siloed areas where you bought an IoT solution that's being used in one department of your city over here, and the other departments over here had no idea that that was already procured and set up and installed, and then they went with a different competing technology, and then another department does something else, and then you don't have a smart city platform that pulls all that data back in. So try to have a strategy and a long-term vision of what you want to accomplish. I usually tell city officials that I've talked to, mayors, innovation officers, CTOs, CIOs, tell me what problem you're trying to solve, and then I'll show you the smart solutions that are available.
And the city of Las Vegas has been one of the most innovative. Michael Sherwood and his team have done a lot of pilots. You've probably seen a lot of press on some of the things they've done. Next stage, they didn't have necessarily the staff to manage all these, but they had a lot of cooperation from their vendors, and there was low barrier entry, a lot of costs waived to do these pilots. He's got all these pilots all over the city, and what he's run into is how to continue funding these projects. And there was an excitement about the pilot. They've actually proved in that there's real value to the solution, but then how does the city build that back to departments that are really the ones that are utilizing those sensors or those video cameras and those different technologies? So even when you start to get some of this out there, it's how do you manage it and fund it and keep that operating expense paid for?
We have one more comment here.
Yeah, no, what I'd like to add is that, there are a lot of platforms out there that have, call them open APIs where you can connect IoT devices to those platforms. But what you'll find is that they have proprietary protocols regarding communications. So, there was one slide that indicated, I remember, to know your costs. So really, to know the cost of any type of a solution, you really need to examine it with a magnifying glass today, just to know whether you're going to be able to add the devices you want and what the costs are going to be to add those devices as well.
So let's take a step back from technology for a minute, because there's a common theme going on here in a lot of the comments, and that is you have a project, you implement the project, people don't know what to do with the information, right? The worker roles often aren't there. There's no official point of responsibility. I mean, we find this a lot. I think it's a general rule in the implementation of any kind of advanced system-like technology is who's going to use that technology and how. So what types of comments do you have about developing worker roles and responsibilities and actually getting people to use this information in an effective manner? What can we do to develop those worker roles and actually put the information into the hands of people that need it and will make decisions about it?
So with a few instances of cities local to, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I've worked with some of our smaller suburbs outside of Cleveland, and the best advice I could give any city or any company working with cities is to collaborate not only with the decision makers, but also with the influencers and the actual employees that will be using whatever platform or software on a daily basis. They'll be able to give you insight of what they need or what's going wrong or what could it make their life easier. That was beneficial when we deployed some software. It was called CitySphere that helped cut down all the paper and the manual process of their permitting and allocating of inspectors to building inspectors to go out. And there's issues with communicating between the city and the county. When we got we had a group of about 11 people from the city and in that department of permitting. It was a lot easier to see a clear picture of the process and then implement the technology and the software and have them see how it would make their life easier. So sometimes we only communicate with the decision makers who could say yes and no, but it's always beneficial, I've seen, to communicate with larger groups and the end users as well.
I would just say that the cities that I've talked to and have worked in, they have a huge talent problem, just like was mentioned earlier in the building space. So those that have grown up in their roles, whether it coming out of, let's say, a mainframe environment or just certain types of approaches to things, are those folks are retiring and not necessarily retooling within the cities.
And in the building space, I know it's particularly bad.
I mean, it's true across, I would say certainly if you're talking about actual city government itself, that there's no question that that's an issue. So, I think there's a lot of innovative things that cities are doing. But one of the things I think, just when you're talking about smart city platforms, it's almost like taking care of your house a little bit before you add an addition on, right? Let's say, if that's how you're looking at smart city platforms. We've had great success in working through data governance and strategies for how do we consolidate data, remove some of those barriers between departments, even for the data that they have. A lot of times cities don't even realize just how much data they have already that they're collecting. So a lot of smart work can be done in just looking at those data sets, having a data strategy, and how do we create correlations and be better at that, and how do we, drawing from different business units to ask new and interesting questions about the data sets before you even introduce necessarily a lot of new information that your systems aren't really ready for.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, in the building space, when you look at the user group, it's not going to be there. The problem is not going to get solved. There's not enough people. As cities grow and the workforce retires, they don't have enough folks to go around fight fires, much less dive into the analytics to be strategic and think about how do we organize our workflow and how do we get more efficient. So 99% of the use cases and customers that we have hire us as a managed service to handle that. We've got our own challenge with recruiting those folks, but we certainly have an easier time recruiting and paying top wage for those technical resources compared to the city. So I don't know where it's going to go in the long term. We do have one large university in a smart campus environment that is hiring an analyst to operate the analytics platform, but that is one out of hundreds of customers. So I'm not sure it does get solved. I think that cities are going to have to look to outsource it, especially when you get into the areas of their business that aren't traditionally using the technologies.
Let me give you an example of what Orlando did. They won the Smart City Challenge 2016, a group out of Washington. They got a grant. It wasn't much, but it helped them pull the disparate elements together. They had a kickoff at the big basketball arena, the Amway Center, in 2017, June. They hired a Smart City director in 2019. In the interim, from that kickoff, each department had to kind of centralize and bring to the Smart City group any kind of IoT, any platform issues, any of what the Smart City interim guy said was smart toys, he called them, right? Smart apps, but they were toys. So they kind of got a control around what folks wanted in each department, where they were going, and then they began to look at a platform and then the vendors that they needed. So they awarded actually their Smart City work to a company called VHB. And they actually had their first community kickoff last night. I went over there for it. They're going to do 6 of them around the 6 districts of the community here in Orlando. VHB really is known for their work in transportation, but they had the relationship and understanding of the city's IT systems. They understood the utilities systems, who's a cooperative utility. So they have this cooperative group that's helped driving it, but they took a long time, in my opinion, to assess the real needs and then try to work towards a common platform. That was how Orlando did it.
And if I could just add something short to that, once these needs are really determined, what needs to happen is that a defined workflow needs to be provided to the operators so that decisions are not made at the operator level. They're made way before the event ever takes place.
Yeah, very good points. Oh, we have one other comment?
Yeah, the observation of doing the workshops with the community is very important, as well as doing it with the business stakeholders. As someone who works in analytics, I have a few conversations where customers approach us and say, "I'll give you all my data, you tell me what my problems are." Right?
Sure.
That's not a good way to start a project like that. So in cities, if a city starts with the conversation of, I'll create a smart cities platform and that'll tell me what all my problems are, that also isn't a good place to start. So really, you'll get the value out of a smart city investment by doing the workshops, by understanding what the problems are that you're trying to solve for the public, for your agencies and departments, and then use that to determine what kind of platform you'll buy, what are the use cases, what are the analytics, and what's your success criteria.
And Orlando doesn't call it Smart City anymore, right? They were really using that for about 4 years to unify. They threw out Smart City and they call it Future Ready. That's their new terminology.
Future ready.
Future Ready.
That's a good term. So I think some of the things that you said kind of, and I agree with you, there's a lot of pre-work that needs to be done before you dive into these projects, right? This isn't just, I think people fall into the trap of, let's select a technology and implement it, and then we'll figure out what we'll do with it. So to me, there's a lot of that work that needs to be done beforehand, like you mentioned, bringing stakeholders together, determining what your objectives are and where you want to go. Do you have any other deeper advice you'd like to give as far as that pre-planning process and what stakeholders need to come together from what parts of the organization or the city or what have you? I mean, what should we do in the early phases, to make sure that the project is going to be a success in the operational phase? Any words of sage words there?
Yeah, I think that's going to depend on your use case because there's, every city is kind of its own unique entity and has its own unique challenges and problems. So, the cities need to figure out, one, what they want to accomplish, what their problems are, and how technology can then solve those problems. And then three, how they can ultimately pay for the solution to solve those challenges.
If you just do an inventory, right, of everything you have out there.
Oh, use the mic because nobody else can hear you. But
The smart cities that I've seen, they start with some sort of inventory process. Hey, Department A, what do you got over there, right? What are you doing? Where are you spending money on software, right? What are you driving? What are you going to do next year? And they go around, and actually that starts the process, because then they have a handle on what's going on. And I found the transportation departments have more fiber than anyone else in the city, right? But the city didn't never use that. They were trying to construct over routes that they already owned, right? Just with fiber optics, for instance. So the inventory process, it also brings out the animosities and what's not been done and all that sort of thing in some of the cities as well, which is important to getting to a functional group moving the project forward.
And to highlight on the inventory process, that is very key. And if you try to do the inventory process, it takes a long time if you have city employees trying to do that and collect the data besides doing their regular job. So we've done what we call our own Smart City Readiness Assessment, where we come in and we have what we call MONA, our Mobile On-Site Network Assessment kits that we deploy, and we're able to do the inventory process for them, all their applications, IT infrastructure, video surveillance, wireless networks, and make sure everything's configured properly. But our Smart City Readiness Assessment, how it differentiates from what other companies may be doing out there, is we also do the human talent. We assess the employees that are in the city, what qualifications they have, what certifications, what type of education, and then we let the decision makers and the stakeholders understand, hey, there's someone in this department that could take over this type of technology, or if not, here's training that you could have employees take and get certified that would better prepare them to take over that type of technology. And then another pitfall that they ran into is they paid for training for some of their employees, and then their employees realized, hey, I could go to the private market and double my salary. So now we tell cities, make sure you put in writing, if you're going to pay for training for employees, that they agree to stay on for a year or two. That way cities aren't wasting their time and effort trying to train employees for the betterment of the city.
any other comments? Do we have any other questions from the audience before we continue? Okay. Jim?
Hey, I'm the Smart Cities guy here. I'm intrigued by that workshop scenario, because as you know, we're holding a workshop from 1 to 5 that's an IEEE standard on smart city planning. And for you technologists up there, it really is the waterfall model from computer science. You know, what I haven't heard, and I'd like, well, let me ask the question this way. How broad should you cast your net over those stakeholder communities? And I'll preface that with, I know in Las Vegas, they rolled out an IoT scenario, and they found out that there was a lot of traffic, bicycle traffic and accidents in a certain area. They wouldn't have known it without the IoT backbone. And when they drilled down, it wasn't just people casually riding their bicycles, it was food bicycle delivery people. So then they went out and did a transportation audit, put in some big bike lanes and all of this. And to me, that's the cart before the horse. If they really would have went out to that stakeholder community, they would have known. Maybe we go there first. So, you know, as we progress with this IEEE effort, it really is casting a very broad net. And not surprisingly, when I hear VHB won the bid in Orlando, it's because the US DOT trains all those types of vendors to do exactly that. So how, you know, what would be in an ideal workshop? What kind of user needs do you want to see? Or do you want to just see an RFP?
Good question.
I would say, I mean, obviously, it's multifaceted how you would get to kind of a successful process. But I do think understanding your customer, just like any engagement or relationship that you have, So if I'm looking across a city agency, they have what they're charged with doing, kind of what they're measured by, what their care abouts are. It might be something like worker safety. It could be labor related. To understand what those things are, and then ultimately kind of being able to take a lot of information and say, let's go after some quick win kind of things that are gonna like have a big impact on everybody, and show the power of technology before you necessarily endeavor into major infrastructure, widespread smart city type of deployment, because it's really, you got to be able to like show you can do it and have lessons learned. You can't just jump into the deep end of the pool, I would say, for the most part.
I would agree with that, and we're at a point now where, the technology is still fairly new for most municipalities, and finding ways to fund it is challenging. So, finding those quick wins where they can either solve a community problem or generate ROI in some capacity, whether that's with, the two easy ones are lighting and parking usually, and for most cities that have the biggest problems. And those are the ones where they can either generate a lot of revenue or reduce a lot of cost. And, get those wins and then expand the footprint beyond those use cases into some of the more fringe ones like air quality monitoring or environmental monitoring, the things that have value but are hard to put an ROI on.
And here in Orlando, we have a subset community called Lake Nona. Ron Matson from Tavistock is here, the developer is. And, my group, we go around the country, we've profiled 30 cities in the last 3 years, and we haven't found, I live here in Orlando too, so I'm kind of proud. But, bottom line, we haven't found a greenfield community that has grown up with smart like Nona has, where they merge the technology, but they understand the need of the citizen. So they start with health and good living, right? And then they use technology to feed into that. And it seems to have really worked because they keep growing. And there's a tour tomorrow, actually, over there. So anyway.
Yeah, we do have a tour that's going out tomorrow.
It's pretty interesting. They're going to show autonomous vehicles. For those that are trying to sell, they just got $20 million in funding from the feds to grow that.
Yeah. And I think that's, we talked a lot about technology here today, but like I said before, this is all for a reason. It's for citizens and health and sort of improving the overall quality of life as well. Let's talk about security and cybersecurity for a second. I think everybody mentioned a little bit of something about cybersecurity in their presentations. And maybe for the end user, owner, operators, and integrators, maybe we can explain how they should address cybersecurity issues with smart city platforms. Maybe the vendors that are on the panel could maybe discuss some, features and functions related to cybersecurity, in their own offerings that people might want to look for and things like that. Any words on cybersecurity and overall security?
I'll go, because that's a big part of what we do as a company. So we, and again, the specific strategies are going to vary based on the scenario, but we kind of bring a variety of expertise to really assess and kind of roadmap what that security contract needs to look like. So it's not just like, hey, you apply this, you apply that, you're good. It's more about process. It's about data flow, and obviously there's more and more different players that have capabilities in different spaces. So I mentioned before, like we're not in the space of building anything really, in the sense that like we don't build these platforms, but we partner with the right platforms that we think apply the right situations. So in the case of Fybr, for example, they have hardware-based encryption from sensor to gateway, and that is and it's based on a proprietary LoRa protocol that they've developed. And it is lightweight, and the battery lives of those sensors will last an extremely long time as a result. So for us, that's a differentiator, right? So that's so again, it's really about bringing the right expertise to solve the problems that apply in that particular customer.
All right, Ben, I'll have my gift for you for the free plug later. So, but as you said, we learned early on that having control of every piece of the security from the time the sensors are manufactured all the way through their life cycle to decommissioning was critical, because we found, when we were partnering with third-party providers, what would happen is we would end up with security patches, and then who's responsible for deploying those? Is it us? Is it the partner? Is the timing of those releases synchronous with everything else we're doing? So we ended up with holes in the security pipeline that we weren't comfortable with. So we took it all in-house, and including manufacturing here in the U.S., which was a point of differentiation, so we could actually control that entire life cycle completely. And then when we do that and we own that entire chain of the communication chain from the device all the way to the back end, then we could start adding a little more sophisticated communication and authentication measures into the protocol so that we could verify very easily if a device was actually authenticated to talk, if it had permission to talk at a given time. We could prevent replay attacks. We could prevent denial of service attacks, a few other things very easily, or much easier with the platform when we owned the entire ecosystem. So that's why we chose that approach. Now that may not be the right answer all the time, but that's the approach we took, and it definitely has its benefits in some use cases.
I'll also add that with, we talked about IoT and smart technology, but most of these cities, their cybersecurity teams are lacking, and their infrastructure isn't necessarily up to par to begin with. So we always go over their configurations, their WISP, written information security policy, and even after we do these security assessments, showing them where they're vulnerable, where they're lacking, and we get them up to par, it's not a set it and forget it and everything's okay. It's an ongoing task to make sure that your networks, IoT, wireless, and your IT networks are secure. You're always adding, changing your environment in your IT networks. So we have some proprietary software partners that we work with that when we're gone, they could use the software to test, and it'll attack their network and show them, since you added IT infrastructure and IoT infrastructure, are you still secure? So instead of having to call us back and come out to verify that, the software will show what type of attacks it does and show them where they're lacking or where they need to reconfigure their firewalls or their switching and so forth. So there is technology coming out every day. We have partners all over the world that we work with. So I believe not only IoT, but IT security is something that needs to be paid attention to, obviously, on a daily basis. So.
City of New Orleans, they paid between $50,000 and $100,000. Frank Johnson, who I consider one of the brightest guys, CIO of Baltimore, he's still on medical leave after his city was held hostage. It's not a topic that you can ignore. No. My group does not touch on it because it is that complicated. But it is, we see it as we go around the country. It is top of mind, and unfortunately, so many of them are still exposed. And they keep that little 50 to 100 grand on the side to get out of trouble quickly.
Yeah, ransomware is a huge problem. Lots of people are exposed, but it goes way beyond ransomware to touch on many other issues too. And it starts, to me, it starts at the supplier selection phase, right? If you don't have those cybersecurity-related selection criteria in the early phases of the project, that's where you're going to start to run into trouble. I think they do. Maybe people think they do, but I know that they don't. So that's something that we need to continue to talk about and continue to raise awareness about. It's not something people like to talk about, unfortunately. When I go to some of these smart city conferences, people just don't want to talk about it. It's too uncomfortable.
We're going to cancel our New Orleans pet faction. We're producing 8 in 6 months, and we've got all 7 lined up at the New Orleans one. Nobody wants to come out and talk about it. Yeah. It's a difficult issue. Do we have another question back here? Yeah. Oh, it's just the mic. Yeah, we can't hear because just use the mic next time. We have about 5 minutes left.
Larry, I have a quick question for you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Rob, go ahead.
For the panel, so I mean, we're talking about the business case of smart city platforms, and when I speak with cities, I often get the question of, how do we monetize this? And it's usually smaller communities. So I was wondering, how do you guys talk to, the end customer or the integrator that you're working with to help, kind of bridge that gap and help the cities realize an ROI on an initial investment? And, what's that time frame as well?
I'll take this one. I'll give two use cases really fast of a couple of our customers. The first one was San Francisco with the SF Park pilot that was done, a federally funded pilot from 2009 to 2013. What they did is used our sensor technology to look at their utilization and help to optimize their parking utilization. So they took high utilized areas and raised the parking rates, and then in lower utilized areas reduced the rates by an equivalent amount. So across the board, they didn't raise their parking rates materially across the entire city. Within 3 years, they took their parking revenue just by making their infrastructure more efficient from $66 million to $99 million a year, which is a fairly significant lift in a fairly short period of time. That's from not charging more money for parking, just from two things. One, from actually offloading people from the high utilized areas where they were circling to the areas where there was always available parking and getting them to pay the meters there instead of either parking illegally or double parking or whatever. And then compliance went up as well. So when people realized there were sensors in the ground, they actually began to pay for parking more effectively because they knew that they were being monitored more heavily. Another one is a city that we are working with right now on the East Coast who they're a coastal city, so they have flooding issues, and they have a flood wall that cost just over $15 million to build, and has about a $750,000 a year maintenance budget, which is now a fairly substantial hit to the city's bottom line. They've taken their parking infrastructure, and we're working with them to develop a platform and a system that will allow them to fully fund the maintenance of their tide walls with their parking infrastructure. So, the short answer is parking is a very easy way for cities to generate revenue, and it's a lot of times most cities don't understand or realize how much money they're leaving on the table in just that vertical alone. Lighting's another one where, switching to LED lighting and then switching to intelligent lighting on top of that are ways that cities can add tremendous amounts of functionality while reducing their cost.
Yeah, the parking one's a good one. We've been on a couple of teams where the cities converted their parking management and privatized it and had the private entity increase revenue and share that with the city. We recently, being in the built environment space, it's pretty easy, right? Because they know what they're spending on utilities, on maintenance. They've got capital costs. They've got a lot of aging infrastructure. Most of our buildings were built in the 70s and 80s, right? So you look at the age of these systems and what they're spending. So I think Ben said they're use driven or use case driven, and I like that terminology, because if you go and you just go down the accounting ledger and where are they spending money and where do we think that we can provide operational cost savings, which is kind of the opposite end of revenue generation. We recently replaced 10,000 roadway fixtures in North Carolina, put controls on those lights, and to help NCDOT manage their service level agreement. And I mean, I can't remember what this was, a $30 million implementation that will pay for itself in less than 10 years, and additional savings will fund maintenance for 15 years, and DOT will not have to service those lights. We'll handle that for them. So I think if you start with where are they spending money and find that use case, and you can make a business case for it.
I think these were some good examples of smart technology solutions that can have an ROI. But Rob, was your question more so how can cities monetize a smart city platform, or what the ROI is on a smart city platform?
I'd be interested in your take on that too. So,
because the smart city platform in itself is like an operating system. When cities and companies invest in Microsoft Office and you have a Windows computer, they don't say, well, what's my ROI when I buy Microsoft Office or Windows operating system? The smart city platform that you choose is basically your operating system to implement smart parking, smart LED street lights with nodes and sensors in them, smart building technology. That's where all the visible information and data will come to, is your dashboard. So when city officials ask, well, what's my ROI when I'm spending on the smart city platform? There's a lot of technology you could add that will come through that platform, but it's an overall efficiency of your operations that is the value of a really good smart city platform.
Yeah, the examples that the panel has given are all very good examples of way that you can recoup your cost for deploying these technologies. I've seen very few examples where the revenues generated fully pay for the capital cost for the investment. And a lot of cities expect to be able to do that, and that rarely happens. However, there's one area that I think cities haven't actively chased, and that I think is, and I worked in Asia for 3 years in smart cities. And one of the things that I saw there was when a smart city program entered a city, within about 2 years, that city would have a new startup ecosystem around smart city technologies, right? New employment, new companies, new exports either to other countries or other regions. So one of the things I would encourage cities to do is build into your RFPs, right, the requirement that you need to purchase technologies, IT services from local companies, help them build up those skills, and pretty soon you'll see those companies then exporting, right, building those skills there, learning how to do smart city stuff, whatever it is, and then they'll offer it within the state, right, within the region, and that'll generate an upgrowth in GDP, right, in hiring, and that's something that I haven't seen cities measure very well or attempt to do very well.
I've also seen some, RFPs that are currently out there where the cities are allowing the bidders, the contractors to sell, data that's collected. Of course, obfuscating, identification parts of the data. And what that does, it allows the contractor to be able to offer a reduced price on their project that they're bidding.
Yeah, just one other example, or a couple, where I've seen some changes is leveraging city-owned assets. So obviously poles, buildings, there's a lot of ways to get antennas and newer DAS and different kinds of systems that are kind of 5G driven, other kinds of things like that. A good source of revenue, and whether you can keep that out of the general coffers of a city is another matter. And then the other, what I would say is fiber that's in the ground too. So fiber on poles. We're working with a big city in the Midwest around this problem because they have miles and miles of fiber they've deployed for their streetlight signaling, and they never made it even a routable network. So they need that kind of IT infrastructure to do those kinds. So sometimes even the infrastructure might be kind of there if they can just turn it up and get it working for them.
Well, thanks, everybody. With that, I think we're out of time. Lunch is starting, so let's have a hand for our panelists and our presenters. Great stuff, great discussion.